I'm going to have Jerry Brown read this off for me if he is willing to do that. So I'm going to hand this paper over to you and just make sure you don't read off the answer, but just all the choices.
All right. So it looks like the question we have today is, which church is called the Cathedral of the Plains? A, St. Joseph's in Hayes. B, St. Mary's in Ellis. C, Sacred Heart Cathedral in Salina. Or D, St. Fidelis in Victoria.
Amazing. Once again, the number for that to call in is the same as to donate, 785-621-4110. 785-621-4110. Which church is called the Cathedral of the Plains? St. Joseph's in Hayes, St. Mary's in Ellis, Sacred Heart Cathedral in Salina, or St. Fidelis in Victoria? Which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, St. Fidelis is a minor basilica.
It is a minor
basilica. It is a minor basilica. So pretty cool that we got one of those out here in central to western Kansas. It's not an easy thing to get a minor basilica, I don't think. So
no, it's not.
All righty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce us to Jerry Brown now, and hopefully I can make it through this one. I haven't coughed all day, but suddenly I get on the microphone, and what happens? My voice decides to just go all funny on me. So here we go, 5 p.m. And if we don't get anybody calling in for the trivia questions, we will reread that in about 15 minutes or so. So if you missed it, don't worry. Might just read it one more time just to be safe. Which church is called the Cathedral of the Plains? St. Joseph's in Hayes, St. Mary's in Ellis, Sacred Heart Cathedral in Salina, or St. Fidelis in Victoria? Those Volga German churches, they sure know how to build them.
They do.
All righty. Jerry Brown is a fourth-generation resident of Ellis County, a descendant of the Volga Germans, I just mentioned them, who came to Ellis County from Russia in 1876, just a little bit ago. Raised on the family farm west of Victoria, Jerry moved to the city of Hayes to begin his teaching career and has lived there teaching in the Hayes School District for over 25 years. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
While his area of specialty has been mathematics, Jerry has always had a passion for history and his Volga German roots. Jerry is active with the Sunflower chapter of the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia in Ellis and Rush counties, and is currently a board treasurer for the Ellis County Historical Society. He looks forward to retirement someday when he can spend more time exploring the many treasures of Ellis County's rich culture and history. And this just in, we do have a trivia winner. Anthony Brown is the winner of the trivia question. So, which church is called the Cathedral of the Plains? That is going to be St. Fidelis in Victoria. I know at one point that we had something like the 8 Wonders of Kansas as well. That was a thing that was going around, and that was
we made that list too.
Oh, yeah, we did. That, I mean, it's just a beautiful church. I mean, if you haven't been there, you should really go and visit because it's well worth the time. It's just off of I-70. Won't take you more than 5 minutes to go off I-70 and park in the parking lot and just walk in and see how amazing is beautiful. Recently renovated too within the last 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Yeah, they did. They had a restoration project where, number one, they needed to work on the stained glass windows because those were original to when it was constructed back in 1911. And so a lot of the leading was weakening and the glass they were afraid that it was going to fall out. So they had to take the windows out and completely put them all, soldered them all back together again. And then reinstall them. And then they did a repainting job as well. So it's totally fresh and up to date now on the inside, period, appropriate to the period from which it was actually constructed.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay. So we have 6 churches that we are going to talk about today. Those are going to be Victoria, Walker, Catherine, Piper, Munger, and Vincent. Those names are familiar to me, as a resident of Hayes and growing up here, just throwing around and, just beautiful churches. I remember when I was in school, we did a church tour and they took us to all of them and we got to see them and it, just amazing. So, we started with Victoria. So, why don't we kind of stay there?
We'll stay there.
Yeah.
That's my home. That's where I grew up. That's really where my interest in churches kind of came from anyway. As growing up in St. Fidelis, I, was a little bit potentially spoiled, I suppose, in thinking that, well, isn't this what every Catholic church looks like? And found out that that really wasn't quite the case once you get outside of Ellis County. And so, getting that idea in mind really was, had made me really interested in what kind of was going on. One of the things I was going to talk about is exactly what you said, was that, it is named the Cathedral of the Plains, and that story comes from William Jennings Bryan when he was running for president, and he decided to stop by, and he coined the phrase right shortly after the church was built. And of course, he didn't become president, so we forget about him, but we still remember the Cathedral of the Plains. And then you also mentioned the idea that it's a minor basilica too, which is a great standout for Victoria in the fact that it has those blessings of the Holy See and the Pope and that kind of stuff. It just really adds to the pilgrimage feel, of St. Fidelis. But historically speaking, the beauty and the grandeur of this like Romanesque structure, this giant structure, is actually that it's the third church that Victoria's had, which might seem very crazy to think that in this time frame that we've been around, that Victoria's had four churches, four Catholic churches. And so the very first one really was just attached to a home when they first started. I was just visiting in the lobby, and we were talking about how these pioneer families, they came and they dug a hole in the ground to live in, but then put all of their effort and resources into creating a place to worship. That was really first and foremost in their minds. And so I think that's to be noted in the fact that, even when they were still trying to build their own homes, someone decided to, dedicate part of their home that they were living in as a place for people to gather and go to church and have mass and have those kinds of things. So I think that's kind of cool. So that really serves as the first church of those people, right? When they first came. And then the first, what I would consider structural church, was dedicated to the Sorrowful Mother, and it was built in like 1877, and in the fall of 1877. And at that point, there was hardly any money. And so one of the big things I think that was helpful was, at the time, if you understand, when a lot of times people talk about the Twin Cities, they talk about Minneapolis and St. Paul, but really there's the Twin Cities right here in Ellis County, which is Hertzog and Victoria. They were these two, this German town and this English town, that were like butted up against each other, and one was Catholic and one was not. But there were a few Catholics within that Scottish English settlement of Victoria who really were instrumental in like helping get the money to pair with the labor that the Germans could provide to get that first church built in 1877. And that was a really big deal, and one of the first times that we saw this unity kind of build between people who don't even speak the same language. But there was that faith connection there that helped that get built. So I think that was very cool. That they outgrew that way too fast. And so then they decided for the third church, they built one, and it was around, I think, 1884. Was about the time they built the first St. Fidelis church on the site, kind of where the current church is now. And then they outgrew it. The steeple got hit by a tornado. There was all kinds of crazy things that were happening. And so then they built what we see now as that magnificent structure right around the outside of it. It's just an amazing feat to think how long it takes to build a structure like that today with the tools and the resources that we have in hand. But then go back 100 years and think, we didn't have those tools. We didn't have that kind of technology and machinery, and yet we could still do it. It's just a feat that I'm flabbergasted by continually.
That's amazing. I know out in Denver, they have a seminary out there, and they have a beautiful chapel, but it's made up of all these different bricks that are all cut differently. And the thing that they say about it is that they couldn't make that chapel today at least not the way it is. You know, you could make a brick chapel, but you couldn't make it that way today because we don't have the industry of brick that we do, right? It's all machine made, whereas those bricks were made more by hand and specialized. So they have 50 different colors and sizes, colors, and all this crazy stuff. And so you don't have that today, where bricks are all made the same way. Exactly.
That uniformity. Yeah.
So with Victoria on the list of like which church was built first. So I guess so the current Cathedral of the Plains, 1911, you said.
Right.
Okay.
1911, 1912. Yeah.
So which church comes first in Ellis County of the first one that was here, and then maybe of the ones that are standing today, because Victoria, you know, went through a bunch of different ones. So which city or town had the first church built, and then which is the oldest church standing today?
Okay, so and that's an excellent question because they're not the same answer. So Victoria did have the first. In 1877 was the first to have a structure. St. Joe's and Hayes had the first parish. Okay, they had the first parish, but we beat them. I say we because I'm a Victoria.
Yeah.
We beat them in getting a structure built. Of the churches that are currently standing, Mungers is actually the oldest. It was built in 1890, and it's the oldest of those churches that are still standing in its original structure. Catherine's very close behind in 1892, and so some of them had some, previous like wooden churches and those kinds of things. But as far as like standing structures that are made of limestones, that are still standing today, Mungers is the oldest in that frame.
That's amazing. I always know that whenever I'd bring friends from out of state or even from Eastern Kansas too, just bringing them around, you drive by on I-70 and you can always see the church. Always see the church and limestone, beautiful limestone. And I think we're one of the only places in the country where limestone churches are just so prevalent.
Yeah, because there were no trees. I mean, when they came and that lumber was just to build something as grand as they needed, wood was kind of unfeasible. And it would cost a lot. I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I think like trying to haul in enough brick or stone from somewhere else. And they just were able to like go in the backyard, scrape off some topsoil and start digging out some stone. I mean, it was just like, it was such a readily available resource that just miraculously was just in their backyard, literally. Most of the quarries for the stone come along the Smoky in the southern part of the county. So down around, Pfeiffer area, in that area, a lot of that stone comes from that area. Stone from farther to the west, it's just a little too soft to make the kind of, they really needed that bedrock limestone that came from the Smoky area to really be the foundational and the strong pieces that they needed for their church structures. So yeah, it's just a unique anomaly for the area, given the lack of other resources and the prevalence of something that was just right there.
I think it's fascinating too. Sometimes some churches are more yellow and some are more white, and you can see the difference in the stone. Is that based on location where they got the stone from, or?
Yeah, that's totally based on the quarry that it came from. I might be speaking out of turn, but I do feel like a lot of times the yellow stuff is harder than the white stuff.
Okay. Now, this is maybe a little bit of a spoiler, so if we need to come back to this, we can. But I have noticed sometimes the limestones will have a lot of black on it. Now, if that's a spoiler for another for church, we can come back to that. But what causes that?
It's just patina. It's just aging of the stone. Some buildings will, come in and sandblast to try and get that black off of it. And you're going to hear, differing opinions from people who feel like, oh no, that sandblasting will weaken the stone and make the stone weaker. And others will be like, it just makes it, brings it back to its original beautiful scene. I don't know which of those is right or if there's truth in both. but it really is just an aging process that
Okay.
happens naturally to the stone.
So if your church is more black than yellow, it's probably been around.
It's just been around a
It's
lot
been around
longer, and they haven't
longer.
had enough money to go and have it sandblasted. That's mostly the case. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you want to talk about next?
Well, let's go ahead and so I just think too, I think it's beautiful. I know that's one thing I know with the Catholic Church is that when the Catholic Church enters a new area, it takes what is good and true and elevates it before God. And so, like you mentioned, too expensive to bring in wood, too expensive to bring in brick. You know, what are you going to use? You're going to use the limestone. And you can see for yourself, the churches are still beautiful, even though limestone is not necessarily a traditional way that you would build a church out of. And then, too expensive to bring in wood, to bring in brick. And you'd mentioned too with Victoria, especially, and I hear this all the time for people that care about Volga German heritage, is that how important faith was to the people. So they come in, and the first thing they do is, like you said in Victoria, they dig holes to live in and build a church. So how do they even afford? How does the quarry system work? How do they even afford to quarry and bring the limestone for the church?
They just did it. I mean, it's whether they partnered up with people who had already been here a little bit before them, or they just learned it themselves. But they took the feathers and the wedges, and they just did it. They just and for the purpose of Victoria or the construction of any of the limestone churches, each of those families was assessed. They were like, your family needs to bring in 7 loads of limestone. All right, let's get her done. And so, after you've worked all the day long, plowing your fields, you go out and you load a wagon full of limestone and you take it into town. I mean, that was kind of just what they did, because the immigrants were poor. They didn't have money. And so the only thing they had was their labor. And so they were able to quarry the stone themselves, take the stone, haul the stone themselves. That removed all of that shipping cost, all of that materials cost, all that labor cost. And so, and then some of the others in later years, there was like, wheat taxes and different, things that they would put on, or little assessments they'd put on, harvests and stuff like that would help to pay for the other portions of it. But also, when we think about, I don't have those numbers written down. I wish I would have, just for the purpose of this conversation. But the price tags on those early churches, it's like we bill all of, I'm just going to say, Munger's church or Catherine's church for $2,000. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy to think, the price tags in today's mindset and in today's money ideas just seem ridiculous. Like, how could you possibly build a structure for like just this amount of money? But at that time, that was also a lot of money. And so I know, like, mentioning Victoria, because that's what I'm familiar with, as more so, is that, the British who were in Victoria, those Scottish and British noblemen, and the Maxwells in particular, were the ones that were Catholic, and they were helped so much to get that first church started. They went back to England and said, Dad, we need some help to build this cool church for these cool people back home. And they raised money to help us build our church. They were like, we can get you the finances if you guys can do the labor. And it was just this unity. And I think that's probably why that church got built first, honestly, because of that collaboration and that work. And then from what I've heard, those guys got trained. Like, I'm the guy who's chiseling out the stone. I got really good at it. And all of a sudden, now I'm going to the next town and I'm doing it for them. And now I'm going to the next town and I'm doing it for them. And they've like created a skilled trade for themselves. And it just like they grew this whole concept of we are the church builders. And, they just jumped from town to town to town and either quarried the stone or laid the stone or dressed the stone or built the altars or, all of the things that they needed to do. Altars, I just brought that up. I think one of the things that if you, from the casual person who might just come into the churches and look, and you see these magnificent altars, and you're just like, oh my goodness, these are amazing structures. It's like, how did they ever do that? And then you walk around and you look at them from the backside, they are scrap lumber. It is unbelievable what these crafty men and women were able to do at that time, to take the crates that something came in and fasten it together to create these amazing altar structures. I mean, Piper is a great example of that. When I went down there, they walk you around the back of that altar and you can look at it from the backside. I mean, it is scrap lumber. It is total scrap lumber that is put together, and from the front side, it is magnificently beautiful. It's mind-boggling to me to think who had the skill and the talent to be able to do that. And these were just our local, quote unquote German farmers. What do they know? And they were unbelievable artists. Unbelievable.
I always think about that too, is that so often we are tempted to think that things in the past, we're amazed at it, wondered, because we have power tools, we have the internet, we have schematics, you can print something out, trace it down, and then carve it out yourself, and it's all done for you. But these people had the originality to do it themselves.
Right.
And like you said, these German farmers, but they did it. They got it done.
Yeah. To where, I mean, it makes me feel like the way our lives have progressed in the 150 years since they've been here, if we were having to start over, I don't know if we could do it. I don't know that we could build the same kind of structures, even with the advanced technology that we have, the way that they did. I don't think it could be done.
We got trucks instead of horses. We got jackhammers instead of pickaxes. But we just don't. We take a lot of things for granted.
That's a lot of things for granted.
That's for sure. Going back a little bit, you talked about how Herzog and Victoria kind of not necessarily clashing, but close together in German and English. Do any of the other churches in towns have stories like that, where there were just different immigrant groups kind of butting heads a little bit or working together?
I don't think any of that really butted heads so much. Walker would be an example of one. They had a group of kind of three very small groups. It was just one town, but three little small groups. For the first part, at the very earliest, there were just some westward migration people from like Kentucky area, those kind of folks. And then the Volga Germans kind of came into that area. And then shortly after that, there was a group of just Germans. They came directly from Germany to the United States. They didn't take a 100-year hiatus in Russia like the Volga Germans did. And so there is that kind of a mixture. Even though they had the same language, they really weren't the same people. They were Catholic and they were German, but they didn't have the same background. And so there was some clash. There were, some of them would call, those are the dirty Russian Germans and those are the other Germans. It's like, okay, you're all the same people. Come on, let's just get along. But so that village and Vincent, to a certain extent, kind of have that same makeup of this kind of dual relationship. It was even Mary Kay Shippers. I don't know if anybody, shout out Mary Kay. She talks about in her family, her family has one of the first intermarriages between the Germans and the Volga Germans, and that it really was quite frowned upon at the time.
Really?
Yeah. And so, but it's, that's commonplace now today, but that was not the thing at the turn of the century. So
I know I went to, and you're part of it's the Volga German Sunflower chapter here.
Yep.
We have one of those chapters in Hayes. I remember I filmed for you guys one time, and it was a couple of guys who were speaking
on the dialects.
In the dialects. And even how both Volga German, but different dialects.
Different dialects.
Just
different words for the same word.
Yes.
Yeah. Because even though the Volga German language is unique and interesting, I know it's getting off the topic of the churches a little, but is interesting and unique in the fact that that language got preserved. They left Germany in the 1760s, and then they went to a place where no one spoke German. So, and no one spoke to them in a different German. So that language from the 1760s kind of got encapsulated, and it didn't really change. But as the villages themselves were a little bit separated, they kind of changed in pockets, because even in Russia, the villages were a little bit, I mean, they were close together, but they were a little bit further apart. And so particularly, let's say, the guys you were talking to, you know, this one guy who was from Catherine, and so they were way up in the north, and they were more of an urban center, and more, you know, less farming related and more, you know, like business related. And then you had the other fellow who was from a different place, who was more in the rural setting. Those languages developed differently. Then they ended up coming to the same place again in Kansas, and their languages changed, even though it started the same. It's just a very interesting progression in how we pick up words from Russian, and we pick up, you know, people who study the Volga German dialects find it an anomaly, because it's both old, very old, like an ancient language, but yet has all of this influx of languages from the Russian and from, you know, Turkish and things like that, which is just crazy to think about.
I know, especially growing up here, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that had the same experience as me, but knowing that, and just a little bit of research and history stuff I've done on my own, and just how, you know, Hayes in the Western Kansas, very Germanic heritage, and German being offered in high schools up until pretty recently. You know, German was
commonplace. Yeah.
German was probably more common than learning Spanish. You know, back, especially
in
before
Victoria, we had German class and we didn't have Spanish class.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, well, going back a little bit to
let's get me back on track
to the churches. I mean, Volga German heritage is just fascinating, especially if you aren't Volga German, that's okay. I'm actually part of doing the research. Someone in my family did it, but I'm part of the German. So my family came in through Illinois and then dropped down into Western Kansas, you know, so I'm not Volga German, I'm just German.
Yeah.
So, and it's really beautiful though, because we feel the effects of that heritage, whether we know it or not. The fact that we have limestone churches, the fact that there's these tiny little towns, you know, in America and Western Kansas, you know, why is there a town called Pfeiffer and then Munger and Victoria and all this, you know, all these German sounding names but it's because of that heritage of where it came from.
Absolutely.
Okay, so out of all of these churches, which one? I mean, obviously you're going to be partial towards Victoria, you know, and honestly, we kind of probably all are, because Victoria is just so it's so beautiful.
Yeah, but there are parts of other churches that I like better.
Could you name some?
And so I will name some of those. I have, and potentially it's because my mother is from Walker, and that's the church that my parents were married in, is Walker. I love Walker. I think it is the cutest, quaintest little stone country church kind of feel that you're going to find. It's like this little hidden off the beaten path kind of thing. It still has, you know, Latin painted on the walls. It has this. Munger and Catherine both share this idea. If you think about it, and you've walked into any of the other churches, the altars are all painted white, marbleized. Munger and Walkers are not. They still have that traditional wood grain, that how they were originally built, which I just feel like it gives it a much softer, kind of richer feel to it. And so for that purpose, I I'm partial to both Munger and Kath and Walker in that respect, in their kind of their interior look a little bit. Pfeiffer's grandness with its towering steeples. It is the tallest Gothic church in Kansas. I mean, you wouldn't even think of it because it's down in the valley, and it's, you know, you driving in and you just see that steeple rising up. It's amazing. Like, I love its profile. Pfeiffer's it's just really cool that way. There's something I could say, nice about all of them. They're just also uniquely different, but yet uniformly just grand and beautiful in that respect.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to break in here really quickly with a couple of updates. So this just in, Sienna Miller of Goodland has donated $100 to the Fall Carathon. So that $100 with our donation match from our generous donors and supporters, we have matching funds. So that $100 becomes $200 immediately. So Sienna, really thank you for a $200 donation, because your $100 just turned into $200. We're going to get a thermometer total for you at the end of the night here too. It'll be posted up on the website and probably our social media pages as well when I get around to it, because that's my job too. Not just the voice for the evening. Got other things to do as well. Exactly. Like Cody mentions before, there's two of us that are employed here at the station. Nathan is an amazing executive director, and I am a decent assistant director, if I do say so myself. I try my best to fill in for Cody here as well. Cody, we're blessed to have him. He's amazing. He's done all the carathons since I've worked here, and he just does such a fantastic job, and we're just so thankful that Cody is able to give his time to us from 7 in the morning until 6 p.m. in the evening. So long carathon days, but we do it for all of you listening there at home. All right. Now it is time for the second trivia question. A reminder again, this is children's trivia so 16 years and under. If you're doing homework, maybe you just got done eating supper, maybe you're in the middle of eating supper, but anyways, get this phone number ready, 785-621-4110. I'm going to give out the phone number now so everybody has a chance. I might do a little experiment for all of my live stream viewers just to see. If you're watching on the live stream, kind of hard to get the trivia question because it goes so quick. There's a little bit of a delay in the live stream and our radio streaming app. So 785-621-4110. A little bit of a softball. Going to give a little hint right now, but if you know what the house of bread is, that's going to be the answer. Where was Jesus born? Is it A, Bethlehem, B, Jerusalem, C, Nazareth, or D, Egypt? Where was Jesus born? A, Bethlehem, B, Jerusalem, C, Nazareth, or D, Egypt? Once again, that number is 785-621-4110. If you know where Jesus was born, call in and get your name in there to that drawing for a messenger gift card. We're excited to partner with them. They do so much for us. Our picture of Pope Leo is actually, we got it from them. So if you need a Pope Leo picture in your home, that's the place to go. They got plenty of them. They did great for us. 785-621-4110. Oh, we have a winner. It looks like, I know I made that one a little bit too easy. So we'll announce that winner here in just a second. But we're going to be starting the second half of our 5 p.m. hour with Jerry Braun. He's done a wonderful job so far. If you want to let him know, go ahead and comment on the Facebook page and let him know how much you have enjoyed him so far. So, been talking about Victoria Walker, how some of the altars, if you go behind them, you can tell that it was made with scrap wood, like you said. Mm-hmm. They used the available resources that they had. Oh, real quick. Timothy Swartz is the winner. Okay. So, congratulations. You are now entered into a drawing for a $50 gift card to Messenger traditional Catholic bookstore here in Hayes. So at 6 p.m., we'll be drawing that, maybe a little bit before 6 p.m., probably around 5:55 is when we will be drawing that. So make sure you tune in. If you want a trivia contest, you better tune in for 5:55 and we'll give you a ring if you win that drawing. Okay. And I now back to Jerry here. One of the things that we talked about, differences, you find the altars in Walker very beautiful. I think you said Munger is the same
Mhm.
way. What's the difference with the churches when it comes to their statues and stained glass windows and the artwork in the churches themselves? Does it depend on the town? You had mentioned before, people became church builders and they'd go from town to town helping build these churches. So
Mhm.
can you see similarities between the churches, or are they all pretty different? What does that look like?
There's a lot of similarity between the churches, but yet the stained glass. I'm going to start with that. The stained glass work does kind of change between churches, and a lot of that is time frame. Piper is a good example. Piper had just frosted glass windows for a very long time, probably like up until the 50s. And the Piper people will probably totally correct me on the day when that happened, but it was a much later time. And so when you look at their windows, they are absolutely stunning and beautiful. They are just of a different um, artistic style than the stained glass windows you're going to find in some of the other churches. And so, they're more full color what you think of when you think of a stained glass window, in the concept of piecing together the pieces of different colored glass to create, the images that you want to see. When we look at windows like maybe more like Victoria's or Mungers to a certain extent, Walkers and Pifers, or not Pifers, Catherine's, they're more of a painted glass, and so the base color is what is pieced together, where the artistic style is kind of almost painted onto the glass, and so just a different stylization of what those stained glass windows look like. Some prefer one over the other. I think they're both, equally beautiful in their own ways, for what they look like. So those are kind of some of the examples. When we talk about, like the stations, those seem to be very different from church to church, and I don't know exactly if it was. I don't know. I don't know why they look different than they do. Statuary seems to be more consistent in what they look like, um, and the size and structure of them all. But statuary, interestingly enough, from doing the bus tour, this was something I didn't even really like pick up on until someone mentioned it to me, and then I looked around and I was like, "You are absolutely correct." Um, they were surprised that the central figure in the high altars was not Jesus. The central statue in or painting in almost every one of the churches is of the patron of that church. Saint Catherine is in the center in Catherine. Saint Anne is in the center in Walker. Saint Francis is in the center at Munger. Saint Fidelis is in the center. At Victoria, it's like I didn't even recognize. I mean, I didn't even make that connection necessarily. That those center figures, obviously Jesus has a prominent place within the church all over everywhere else, but that they made that focus of attention on their patron of their church and putting them kind of as a central figure, I thought was very interesting in the statuary work that you see.
Fantastic. Now, towards the beginning of the hour, you had talked about, especially with Victoria, and rightfully so, we spent a lot of time in Victoria because it's just so beautiful. But how Victoria, the current church is the fourth one. Okay.
Mhm.
So how did, and then you said Munger is the oldest of the standing.
Correct.
Okay. So, with all of these churches, how do we see them develop as the communities develop? I know in St. Joseph's, they have a little bit of a timeline of how theirs grew. Victoria, the same thing.
Mhm.
We heard about that.
Yeah.
And these other parishes, did they build their church and they were good to go, or
M-
what does that
You
look like
know,
for most of the
I would say
communities?
most of them that were what I would consider like parent villages. Walker was an offshoot that grew up out of Victoria being overcrowded, and Vincent was the kind of the same way. Those churches pretty much that were like these like sister or daughter towns, Gorham, Emram before it burned down. Those they usually pretty much had one church. They were later enough in the years. They were in the 1900s. They they built a church. Good, we're good to go. Those early ones went through a progression of probably starting with somewhat of a frame structure and then something more limestone based, and then that was too small and something bigger. Munger again was unique. Even their 1890 church wasn't their first church, but it just was the oldest of the ones that are still standing. They all had this progression. The towns were blowing up. I mean, there were 3 times as many people in those towns as there are now, or more. Um, we looked at some data when we were doing some of the other tour preps, and like the population of like Munger or Victoria, they were bigger in the 1880s than Hayes. There were more people out in the county than there was in the city of Hayes. So we're talking about lots of people. There was this huge explosion of population up until, right, probably the 1910s, 1920s. And then the population started coming back down again as there wasn't enough room for the kids to farm. So they had to move somewhere else, and people moved to town and families got smaller. All of those kinds of things happened. And I think we saw that wave of like, build the churches, make them bigger, and more of them and more of them. And then we've kind of seen that regression. And that process has been a sad story for some of them. Like Munger burned, or not Munger. Well, Munger did burn, but luckily that was miraculously saved. But Emron burned down. Pfeiffer's closed. There's just kind of some of those sad stories for those communities that just kind of dried up. And it's not from the lack of people's willingness and even faith. That's just people and numbers and dollars that really, unfortunately, put a sad ending on some of those chapters.
Okay. So you mentioned fire, and I know my family has a personal story, I think, when it comes to Mudger and
And the flood.
flooding. Yeah. So what are some, close calls or even some destructions of churches in the Ellis County area with these churches, when they face fire, did they get rebuilt right away?
Yeah.
Well, what is that flooding? What kind of damage did that cause, and all those troubles?
Right. So Munger has a story of both. So they had to deal with the fire first, and so there was a fire that took place. And again, talk about putting your faith first above maybe your own life's safety. Those people ran into a burning structure and saved the pews, the statues, they just carried the vestments. They carried everything they could carry out of that church to preserve it. And it burned. It burned to, the stone walls were standing, but the rafters were gone. And you can see that even in how they rebuilt it. When it was a quick rebuild, they were back in a closed space that they could worship in under a year. That's unbelievable. Even by today's standards, that you could probably get that kind of something done. But they didn't put back the arch ceiling. They put in the wooden rafters. So it has that more modern feel, but yet it's the same old structure that it was. And they brought those rescued relics back into the church. So there's a successful fire story. Liebenthal went through that twice. I mean, their church burned twice, and they rebuilt it. They just kept it going. But back to the flood for Munger, that was more of a devastating thing. They had a flood in Munger, and it backed up into the sisters' convent. And then there was an explosion, and then the priest was killed, and the custodians were killed. I mean, it was a very traumatic experience that the towns had to go through in that situation. But and their faith was so strong, they just persevered and kept going. And it was like, this is not going to stop us from, continuing on with what we're doing. And then Munger or Emram was closed already at the time. Some people consider potentially the burning of that structure a blessing, in that sacred space couldn't be misused at that point anymore. It was this rightful kind of farewell song, but it's still a very sad thing to see when you drive past the ruins of that up in the rural part of northern Ellis County.
It seems almost providential that they couldn't bring in wood, and that it was limestone, because with all these, it can't burn. And at the very least, if the roof burns off, you still have the foundation there.
Yes.
You still have the altar. If it's made of stone, if it's made of wood, it's probably a different story. And I think it's so people of faith and heroism running into burning buildings to bring out what was near and dear to them, and what they knew that they needed, that they spent so much time working on. That is amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. I think whenever I study those things, I just think these people are my heroes. I mean, they really are. My ancestors really were my heroes.
Where would somebody go if they wanted to do research into any of these churches? Victoria, Munger, Vincent, Pfeiffer, Catherine Walker, any of these churches, if somebody wanted to go and learn more, or even where you learn more, where can people go to find out more about these churches?
Thankfully, on the 100-year celebration of so in 1976, of the 100 years of them being here in Ellis County, a lot of those towns created some booklets about the history of their parishes and in the history of their churches, or compiled them into booklets. And then again, at the 125th anniversary, a lot of them put out even more information, or their 100th anniversaries of their churches. There's a lot of village or town specific compilations. And Kansas Room has all of that stuff. I believe so. I mean, Jeremy might tell me otherwise, but I feel like the Hayes Public Library has a huge collection of those kind of resources. There were a lot of them at the Forsyth Library in their ethnic studies collection. Since they've kind of gone through this whole transition and the new building and stuff, I don't know exactly where that's ended up. I would assume they'll still have that available somewhere. I don't know where that would be now. And I know that you can even purchase some of those books from the Ellis County Historical Society, or the churches themselves. So a lot, and that's where I got almost exclusively the information that I have been able to use in my tours that I've given, is from the research that has been done for that. So that's where I would direct people to go to find that information. Probably number one would be the Kansas Room, and maybe number two, see if you can stop by the Ellis County Historical Society and try and get even a copy of your own that you can have, because they have quite a few on hand.
Cool. All right, we're down to just the last few minutes of this amazing, and it's really been an amazing interview. Really, probably one of my favorites that I've done.
Thank you.
While I've been here. Why, for somebody who, now I love history personally, I do love history. I love reading about it. I find it fascinating. But for those of us who might not care as much about history, it's just a church, and yeah, it's beautiful, but why is it important to, maybe not, like, if you don't care about history, maybe not learn about it, but why is it important to preserve the history of these churches? Pfeiffer, like you said, closed down, right? But they still preserve the church. Yes. They keep it up. They have, you can find, like you said, you can find the knowledge on the church. Why is it important to keep the knowledge of these churches and preserve the history of them?
Because once they're gone forever. And memories are good, but memories are as good as your memory is. And the longer that we can preserve the actual structures, but we can go and touch them, we can go and see them with our own eyes, we can go experience what it feels like to be in that space. That not only then creates the memories again for you, but for future generations. And I think that is what's so important, is we cannot let, like we talked about, the heroism of our ancestors, we can't let that disappear. It's too valuable to the memory of our ancestors, but it's also too valuable to, the grace of God. I mean, it was through his intervention and his support and help and of these people to make those things happen. I mean, if you have any faith in a God above, you can't question that his hands aren't all over this. And to let that go away, to disappear, to fall into disrepair, it's a slap in the face to our Almighty Father and to our forefathers. And I just think, hand in hand, there's just no reason we shouldn't.
Keep that, definitely. And then maybe final question here before we finish up. Can we find, I guess, kind of a two-parter, is that with Vatican II, we saw a lot of changes with churches. I've seen the old pictures of St. Joseph's here in Hayes. Angeles, Kansas is another one. It's a small town, not really even a town. They had a school and a rectory, but they recently went through a restoration to build back. But you can see the old pictures of that. Do the churches in Ellis County, did they
maintain those?
Did they maintain those, or did they go through some changes? And can we find pictures of those before
there
and
are
after?
A lot of pre-Vatican pictures out there that you can see. I've even been able to find pictures for Victoria of the churches that no longer exist, what the interiors look like.
Wow.
Which is amazing to think that this is what it looked like, and this isn't even a building that's there anymore. And you can tell that they took pieces from this church and put it in the, and like they took it and used it again. Of the churches, a lot of them really didn't change very much. St. Joe's did have some changes. But like I would say, besides potentially some movements of the communion rail and things like that, a lot of the structural stuff and the iconography that was kind of a lot of times wiped away during Vatican, they were resistant to removing that in a lot of those of the parish, the smaller rural parishes. They saw the importance of that and they kept it.
Amazing. Fantastic. Well, I have definitely enjoyed this hour so much. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Yeah, this is beautiful. Like Jerry said, go out and find the history of the church that you went to. Read the stories about it being built. If you're ever feeling down in your faith, why do I do this? Where should I be going? Look back to our ancestors who were here before us, the stories of them building, the fact that, as we said way back in the beginning of this hour, that the people of Victoria were willing to dig holes to live in and build the church before they built their own houses. They built the churches before they built the houses. Those are amazing stories. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. That's going to conclude today, the Wednesday of the 2025 Fall Carathon Light in the Darkness. Pretty soon today, we should have Tuesday up and ready to go on YouTube. You can also go back and re-watch the old streams if you're looking to listen to the full uncut version of these hours. So don't forget that you can do that as well. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. So go ahead and check those out if you're on the road somewhere, don't have access to a radio, you can always tune in on a live stream, or you can use the Divine Mercy radio app. If you go to DV, that's V as in Victor, mercy.com, you can find the listen in stream straight from our website and listen from there. Also, you can go to the Apple Play Store.